you're really helping me see some patterns here of the way I operate, right? I
Yay!
mean, yeah, let's talk about that. And I wonder if other weaver types are like this.
Welcome to the Earth Mates podcast. Together, we explore how to find your path from climate anxiety to community action by asking, who are you? Because just like any relationship, that matters. So get ready to be raw and real, but also playful and silly with me, Chief Relationship Officer Amber Peoples, as we discover what's possible through the lens of the 5 Earth archetypes. Curiosity and subscription buttons highly encouraged. Welcome, my friend. Today, as we record this session, it is a full moon, and I am feeling it. My body is asking for deep breaths today as I navigate this powerful pull of an energy. And so I'm curious about you, wherever you are listening to this, whenever you are listening to this. What is your body saying? How is nature talking to you? And how in this moment can you listen to it? Because we're going to take a 5-second pause in this moment to give you that opportunity. So I'm going to count to 5 quietly in my head. Feel free to close your eyes if it helps you listen to that energy around you. And here we begin. Thank you. Now, I'm delighted to introduce you to our weaver type, Stephanie Zhong. We met about 2 years ago through a program called Impact Accelerators, where we discovered together how to build businesses that can have a positive impact on the world. In fact, Stephanie's very slogan is ignite a movement with your message. And how she does that is by helping people with their brand storytelling. And we're going to get into the details as to how she does that and how she can help you. Before we do that, though, I would also like to say that Stephanie and I connected over something that she did before becoming a brand storyteller, and it was an environmental blog. It was back when blogs were still new and so many people were still trying to figure out what was all of this information around the environment and climate change. And Stephanie had a mission. She wanted to know herself. And so she dedicated herself to this blog. And also she has yet another part of her that she loves to share with people and work with people on, and that is their human design. This is what's so amazing about the weaver types. They include all of these different aspects. And I love that as Stephanie's giggling about it as I talk about it.
Yeah.
And I'm here to share our conversation with you today. And so welcome so much, Stephanie. I'm delighted to be in connection with you again. And I am curious of all those things that I just shared. What's your version of the story?
Hi, Amber. It's so good to reconnect again and start the year this way. And I just want to say hi to all of the listeners. So yes, like the story for me is very similar. We met in this incubator of like social entrepreneurs. And what I remember is that there were about 80 or so people in this group. We weren't necessarily going to get to know everyone. So it was really, really cool that you and I connected pretty early on in the program because we shared this love of the planet. We also, I know you were a filmmaker, and we love stories, and we want to be able to help people build personal relationship with, to create an impact. And so that was something that I think for me, it connected us right away to that. And then later, when I heard about this quiz, and then you reflected back to me that I was a Weaver type, it really did crystallize something for me. I mean, it really resonated for me as uh, the way I like share my genius in the world is about helping people, from a brand perspective, working with thought leaders like us who don't necessarily love the spotlight, but they know that they're here to make a bigger difference, and they know they want to ignite that movement, but they don't really want to be out there, and that's what's getting in their way. So what I love to do is I call it excavating the hidden gems of their story, all the different facets of them that make them them, and then weaving. It's so funny because I call it crystallizing, but essentially it's weaving together these seemingly disparate parts of us that actually in combination make us these very powerful leaders, these very powerful messengers, if we just could see the whole picture ourselves and see how it all comes together to create unrivaled value. And then it allows us to be able to create our own, when we say our own brand, it's like we're building it from the inside out. And our story and our knowing becomes the foundation for us to own our authority in a whole new way. And then to be able to share stories that compel rather than sell people into our vision.
That's so beautiful, Stephanie. I love hearing how this piece of you, this piece that knows how to weave together so many different aspects, has found this pathway to help other people with that, because it can be, as a weaver type, it can sometimes be overwhelming with all the things that you're trying to fit in and squish in, and maybe even wonder, oh, maybe I have to just hide that part of me because over here it's not going to be accepted. And so I really love that you've stepped into this power of the weaver type, and your term of crystallizing it, of really finding that beauty when you distill it and add that pressure to it to create something so beautiful. I love that so much. And what I would love to do is start with kind of back in the history, back in the process of this unfolding and this becoming and this weaving that you've done throughout your lifetime with this blog. Because I know that you were in a place where you had a different career. I don't even know how much that career influenced your sense of identity, perhaps at that time. But I'm curious, what was the impetus in the midst of all of that to start this blog?
My blog was called Fabulously Green, and it was founded one night after watching An Inconvenient Truth, the documentary in the movie theater. I remember this very clearly. I felt utter devastation in my heart and despair, and then shifting to, well, there's still got to be something that I can do, right? To like, what is my part? So at the time, I was going to school for interior architecture and design. So as a weaver, what I used to call a Jackie of all trades, this was a career shifting moment for me. So I was like, I'm going into design. And I only went into architecture and design at that point because I felt like I could make a difference in terms of the planet. Because 10 years before, I wanted to be an architect, but I was just so against building and waste. So I just talked myself out of that. And then I started going down other career paths, but it never really left me, this idea of design and beauty and even expressing ourselves or creating stronger communities based on the spaces we design. So I came home and I just had the idea, why don't I start a blog to start gathering up the things that I am seeing that can help us be more green when it comes to our buildings and architecture and our homes. And at that time, I was also trying to find out how I could green, like as we say, green our wardrobe. So I was like, why don't I do fashion too? So one of the parts of my history is that my mother was a librarian. And the library was basically my babysitter growing up as a kid. So if there's something like one of my superpowers I've developed is being a researcher. So with this blog, I was like, if nothing else, this blog is going to be this place where I can gather together as I'm building my professional career. how can I employ things that are green or products that are green or repurpose things in really creative ways and still not necessarily wear a burlap sack every day or but to actually express who I am and because I do love fashion and I do love living in a space that feels like me, right? And so that was the beginning of it. And so I hopped on, there was maybe two different places you could start a blog. It was place I started was called Blogger, and I remember thinking to myself too, oh, what am I going to name this blog? I had actually in the past tried to start a blog before and built this whole business plan. And when I was done with the business plan, I had so much resistance against it. I just never did it. So I was like, I challenged myself. I said, you could over strategize this thing to the point of inaction. So I'm just going to give you 15 minutes to name this blog. And there it was. No business plan, no content strategy, nothing. It was like, it's going to be called Fabulously Green. So then the fabulous part is how for it to feel joyous, to feel like a, vibrant part of your life while you are supporting the planet. Cause that's what I wanted. And if anybody else found this to be, something that would be helpful, great. And then I was like, that's the community. I wasn't thinking about building a community, but what I was thinking about was providing an alternate place where currently there was no place that could show you options to be able to define your own lifestyle and your own aesthetic while being kind and gentle on the planet.
Yeah, that's such a powerful story of really harnessing that aha moment, that moment of awe, that moment of discovery. And you contrast it with these other moments where you overthought it or you dismissed it or you perhaps even had imposter syndrome, kind of is a phrase that comes to mind with what you
Yeah.
described. And in this moment there was something so compelling for you that you just knew you had to, you just absolutely knew you had to. And I really love that. And I also love that even in the midst of all of that, another term that I use for the weaver type is designer, because there is
Mm.
that element
Oh,
of,
wow.
how artists often work in patterns and metaphors, and eco people, whether it's economy or ecology, they work with networks and nodes and connecting those pieces. But with designers, it is like you said with architecture, like if you change a piece here, it dramatically changes like everything in a really integrated way. And so I view designers and weavers as one and the same, and sometimes use the term interchangeably.
That's fascinating, and you just gave me an aha when I was thinking
Mm.
it, thinking back to this was back in 2006. So this was quite a long time ago. It was before social media. It was, and I committed to just spending 20 minutes a day sharing one thing that I had found out there. And so I was seeing myself as a student of discovery, not necessarily as a professional. And I think that gave me the creative freedom to put things out, but I had been a journalist. So I understood the ethics of journalism and I understood how to, when I research something, make sure, right, that it's actually covering like that it really is truly an environmentally friendly product or a fair trade product. Um, and one of the things that I had almost hesitated to include fashion in there because I was like, well, I am not a fashionista, I'm not a fashion designer, but I knew that I've had this lifelong relationship with fashion. And I was like, I could use this as a learning tool as I am experimenting with my own wardrobe. And it was really interesting how over time, as I started to share things, this community appeared. So, fashion designers or architects or other designers, when you say designers, designers who are out there as lone reads, as independents, from Germany and other places who were literally taking like surplus materials and doing the most innovative stuff, but nobody knew that they existed, would reach out to me and share with me, and then I could spotlight them. And so over time, I mean, what the way you're describing it to me is, I have in the past, when I was like, I want to create a community, and I would set out to create a community, I could get it started, but it wouldn't take off from there. And I used to really critique myself for the fact it's like, how come I can't seem to create or nurture or sustain a lively community? But now, as we're talking about this in hindsight, what I'm thinking about as the weaving piece is that people were coming in, and I was like weaving these stories together of all these different kinds of innovative people who each are doing something phenomenal. I just had a place where people could find me, and the stories became this fabric. And that maybe this whole idea of me trying to force myself to create a community that would change, that actually I didn't know it at the time, but I was using that weaver self to give this opportunity to stitch together this vision and to see like, oh my gosh, so these all these other ways that you could try and use things and see things in a different way, and these different designers. And so it really kind of created maybe more of a tapestry, or more, I used to call it a constellation of knowledge and wisdom and inspirational ideas that people could take away to express for themselves.
I love that aha. That just adds such a beautiful layer of enrichment and uh, calling in, as well as offering to add to that tapestry. And that's just so beautiful. And thank you for sharing that aha moment. I love when those experiences happen right here, right now, and in the moment. And so we had this. And then let's fast forward now to not quite present day, but to when did you have that aha around brand storytelling? Was it a thing? Just like with blogs, it was barely a thing yet. Was brand story a thing yet? Was it like how did you find yourself directed that direction?
Yeah, so brand storytelling wasn't yet a thing. You're really helping me see some patterns here of the way I operate, right? I
Yay!
mean, yeah, let's talk about that. And I wonder if other weaver types are like this. So with brand storytelling, what came about is it was like the other situation. It's kind of like the white space in between things I'm interested in.
Hmm.
And then asking myself, what would happen if you bring these two things together? I thinking about these old, I'm dating myself, but back in the day, there was this Reese's peanut butter cup commercial where I don't know if you'll remember this, Amber, but it was like a person holding a candy bar, a person for some reason holding a jar of peanut butter, bumping into somebody who had a chocolate bar. Like that's gonna happen on the street, Like that makes no sense. But back then it was like they bumped into each other, their stuff rams into each other, and the guy goes, "You've got your chocolate in my peanut butter." And the other person's like, "You've got my peanut butter in my chocolate." And then they realize it goes together, and voila! It's like the Reese's peanut butter cup is invented, right? And I really think that that's, as we're talking, I'm realizing this is sort of the place that I love to play.
Hmm.
And so if we just took the blog for a second, it's like, okay, I loved contemporary, mid-century modern style and design and fun and color. But that back in the day when you talked about eco-friendly fashion or eco-friendly living, it was like you had it, the picture of it was, okay, you are going to wear burlap sacks and you're only going to wear Birkenstocks because that's your only option. And you're gonna fit this and I was like, it's couldn't it be bigger than that? So that was me trying to like mix and match. Like there's gotta be people around here and ideas we can use that will say that I get to be who I am, right? And like it's like an additive of both, and like what would happen in the both and world. So then fast forward then into brand storytelling. I'm working as a marketing director at a large nonprofit. And back in 2012, I happened to stumble across this research done by a guy, well, he was a neuroeconomist called Dr. Paul Zak, and he had done research around how our brains respond to storytelling. And from there was created the 6-minute cartoon. So I love that, again, getting back to entertainment. They basically boiled down the research. It was funded by NASA, around what happens with the brain. And as a result, that opened this whole portal to me that said, oh my gosh, like I have known instinctively for a long time that storytelling impacts people and influences people and creates connections and can dismantle bias in places that facts and figures and studies and dogmatic preaching can't do. But I couldn't at the time prove it to my um the senior management at the nonprofit, who was still leaning on these, like, they were still fortifying our brand with the story of the founder and how they started the organization, and then all these alarming facts and figures and data about educational inequity that just makes you angry. So in the moment when you're angry, you want to do something, but then you feel, at least like me, I feel defeated, right? Like I left Inconvenient Truth feeling defeated. So what could be the other answer? So when I found that research and realized what they said was they could actually even predict with 80% accuracy that if two different chemicals fire off in your body, um, that you could actually shift human behavior. Stories told well fire up this dynamic duo of cortisol stress and oxytocin bonding. And when you do that, what happened in this study was that the people who participated in the study, uh, actually gave more money to strangers and things like that. So this is where this whole power started to kick in. And I was like, I have to know more about this. We have to bring this in somehow and use it responsibly, of course, But the thing that had been nagging at me was, when it comes to brand, like the brands that we love, we identify with them somehow. We feel like we're a part of their community. We feel like we share their values, right? That we relate to them. And I felt like our brand had been this more of a brandishing, lightning rod kind of brand, but it had started to fizzle out in our 20th year. And instead, I was like, what would it look like if we start sharing stories where people see themselves in the story, where this idea of where you live in terms of zip code is going to determine the quality of the education you get, which is going to determine the opportunities you get, right? And so that study helped me to be able to provide some proof, if you will, that if we were to really weave in storytelling as a primary strategy for us, and we were sitting on so many stories that people who work the front lines every day had, that, campfire mode around the office. It's like crying and going, this is why I love to work here and blah, blah, blah. But nobody on the outside knows about it because we're still telling you that only 9% of so many people are going to get the opportunity to go to college, right? And we're talking about very important stats. We're not going to disengage from that, but we're not connecting people to like our own humanity and making this deeply personal, where this is a problem that your heart can actually feel, that you can feel bonded to, that you can actually feel the pain. And then let's move into this place of hope and this place of where you can be a part of the solution instead of, oh, write us a check and we'll take care of it, which I think we still had this very, uh, what's the word? Sort of that,
Sounds
um,
transactional.
It's transactional, it's kinda hierarchical a little
Mhm.
bit. Yeah, it's transactional because your only way of contributing and being part of it is, like, donating to the cause. It's like, "Okay," and then next year you're gonna ask me for money again. "Alright,
Right.
I get it."
Yeah.
But if your head and heart is there, wow, now you can actually do so much more, which I feel like is very connected to what you're doing when you're, you
Mm.
know? So
Mhm.
now it's like people want to be a part of, and everybody gets to be a character in the story. And now actually the trajectory of the story could totally change, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's when I realized on a organizational level that it was important, but the stories themselves were all based in individuals.
Mm.
Right?
I
Stories
love
of
that.
individuals and that this tapestry of
Mhm.
stories we're going to share with you're going to connect to somebody in this story. You're going to
Mhm.
maybe see yourself in this story, and then where you might not have even thought this had anything to do with you before.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really powerful. And there's so much in there that I want to talk about, but I also want to remember that this is a conversation where we're not going to go down a rabbit hole for 3 hours. As much as I would love one of the things that Stephanie
I
shared with me
know.
before is that she has Shangri-La around her. She has all this stuff that's nice and soft around her, and she's excited to curl up. And part of what I imagined when she shared with that me before is like the two of us like curled up having this conversation for like the next 4 hours.
Right?
But
It's
in
like the slumber party that solves the world's problems.
Totally,
Yeah,
exactly.
right. It's like all you have to do is stay up all night with our pillows and our blankets and our hot chocolate, and
And we're
all
gonna
the
do
ideas will
it.
just be like, there it is. There it is. Yeah. Who'd have thunk?
But to have a logical progression in this moment,
Yep.
I love what you said about really painting this picture of brand storytelling, and it really gets at the heart of even like Western storytelling structure. It always starts with a person and a person
Mhm.
and what they're dealing with, what they're
Yes.
finding their way through, or figuring out how to collaborate with, or something along those lines. And so that's what makes me curious to learn. I know that, so you talked about kind of having this aha moment about brand storytelling with an organization. But then you shifted to working with what I think you call do-gooders, and move specifically to those individuals, those leaders. And I'm curious for you, what was that process for you?
Mm, so good. So when we experimented with brand storytelling for this nonprofit, and this was a really well-funded kind of media darling of a nonprofit. So their founder story had been told a gajillion places. All these, people had seen them, but that story had gotten stale. When we started sharing stories, the one that suddenly went viral was around a young student who was speaking about his own experience of what it's like for him to go to school with, the minimal options he had, right? But owning the agency of his story, he was actually speaking at a panel of teacher leaders who were listening to what he had to say as a way to inform. So here he's telling his personal story. He's 15 years old, and this is the voice everybody wants to listen to. And what it took out of me, I'm going to weave some aspects of my story now that I hadn't connected before into this conversation.
Awesome. Yes.
So I'm just going to plant this notion of how do we get to individuals. I When I was 12 years old, I had bought Diary of Anne Frank with my first money I ever earned in my allowance. And that her life, I mean, my connection to her is really deep. I ended up naming my boutique agency after her before I shifted from organizations to individuals. I was called Dear Ann Media. And what she showed me was that a young girl can change the world with her story when she's really clear about what her story is, even in the face of a government that's trying to eradicate her existence. And just like sit with that for a second, you know? Um, we have more power inside us than we realize, but the stories about us and who we are, what we're capable of doing, what we're not capable of doing, has been inscribed from the outside since we were born. So when you brought up the imposter syndrome, I had loads of it, loads of it. When I stepped out and what I realized was that I felt more connected to helping individuals like myself, starting with myself being a student first. Like, how do I gain that agency and that ability to speak the way that 15-year-old student did, the way that Anne Frank did? Because otherwise, I'm going to be living in like a shadow career of I won't be able to do my fullest if I don't feel like I have that full consciousness of myself. And so when I left the organization, I left the organization because they were still really hesitant to try and do more experimenting. And I was like, this is the direction I want to go in. Like, I'm so all in on this work. So I went looking for, I was like, there's got to be storytelling agencies, because advertising agencies have been using stories for forever. And you could argue that most of the time it's in a direction you don't want it to go, but we can't deny that we love stories and we're wired for stories. We're just attracted to them like chocolate. So how do I so basically I basically made myself student number 1 because I had this funky weaver like collection of careers, and it would take me 30 minutes to explain to you what I've done, and you've already lost interest in the first 5 minutes. And you know it, and I know it, but I still can't close the loop in my own brain. And that was so frustrating. And it would usually send me to hanging out in the bathroom stall at networking events rather than actually being in the rooms. Like, that's how it just made me feel really small, really convoluted. Because as a weaver, I'm guessing you can tell me, but as a weaver, or what I call in my program, like the Jackie of all trades style thought leader, it is really hard to see yourself and weave it all into one clean thing that makes sense to other people, even though you know in your bones that the sum is greater than the parts, right? And so I just hid out so much, and it was so painful. I finally said to myself, you're going to have to really get clear on what your story is and how that connects to the brand of work that you do. And that was a windy road that took about 2 years of me gathering up different storytelling tools I had learned as a journalist or as a podcast producer, as a marketing director, as a blogger, as a writing teacher, as a designer. I was like, let's pull it all together. And it was a messy process, but when it clicked, now all of a sudden I can introduce the idea, because I actually had to help people see what brand storytelling is and why that's important to them. And then who am I to be the person to weave this for you when this isn't even really a thing yet, you know? It's not a proven thing. So that once it clicked and I started literally coming out of the bathroom stalls, and I started to share about this passion and why, like, this whole, like, how people see, like, walk into the power of brand storytelling. Then I started working with thought leaders who were trailblazers, most of them, because they were like, I have struggled with this my whole life. Like, I see something that nobody else sees, or is so future forward that no one knows how to talk about it. I don't know how to talk about it with people. I know I'm boring people, or I'm confusing them, or, and it's so discouraging because I know that this thing I have to offer could really make a difference. And so they were the folks that came to me first. And so I was helping them one on one, not realizing that I was a weaver. that I could easily weave together for other people. I could easily see the chocolate, the peanut butter, and the jelly and whatever and be like, here's the amazing dessert that you are and that you're making, like it was fun for me. And then when they got it, the clicking goes inside them. And it's almost like some light goes off and you see like now they can't wait to go out and talk to people. And so when I started to see that, I was like, huh, could I teach people to do this for themselves? Because there were people I were meeting that were like founders of really early stage startups. Like they're doing everything. They're wearing all the hats. They don't have the money to necessarily have someone customize this for them. So they're like, can you teach it to us? And that was how the Own Your Message program was born as a beta, having 6 women go through it in the beginning and taking them through. Now, looking backwards, I could weave together the framework and take them through it so that they're mining up their story. And in peer groups, we're helping each other to see and crystallize and integrate it. And yeah, and that's why for me, I think it's so fun to work with because I know what it was like to feel disempowered until Anne Frank showed me I had the power. And we hinted at human design, but one of the things I learned later when I started looking into human design and weaving that in too was that that was actually part of my own destiny and part of my natural DNA is helping people reclaim their power, that's actually something that was core to my purpose. And I didn't know that consciously. I was just sort of unconsciously doing this. But now that's part of my story too. So that helps me to be better at what I do, right? And for the people I work with, because their leadership, what's so cool is they don't fit the mold at all. And they don't even realize how special it is yet until they know what kind of a archetype they are, right? Like something like you are a weaver. And I'm going to leave this interview going, wow, like this weaving, this is actually empowering me to understand even more when I'm in my zone of genius, what's actually happening. And I could be more intentional with it. Now I would have the power to even use it like a fine instrument, right? And that's what I like to do as far as with leaders. I think so many of us have been, I was going to say the word conned, which is a very strong idea, but we've been inculcated into this idea that there's a certain way of doing leadership. If you're not outgoing and you're not charismatic and you're not, then you're not a leader. And I just don't believe that's true. And Amber, I like in terms of you developing this system, I'm curious, like for you, if that's the same thing you're thinking, it's like it's totally not true.
Cliffhanger alert. Great question, Stephanie. So good, in fact, that we're gonna leave it right here for now. Meanwhile, I'd love to see your answers in the comments. Then, tune in next Tuesday for part 2 of this episode. Hey, Earthmate! How did that episode resonate? Did it stretch you, inspire you, or perhaps irk you? I'm here for it, so please reach out. Besides the socials, we have a community to practice with on our website, eartharchetypes.com, where more Earth archetypes can guide your path and become dear friends. A great place to start is the quiz to discover your type. Oh, and on your way, I'd love for you to hit the subscribe button. See you again soon.